this has been the most challenging week in my ministry experience that I can think of in terms of trying to understand how to do this right. In part of me, it's unthinkable to not have church. I think America and modern Christianity has lost the understanding of what it means to be the body of Christ. And so to reinforce that by not being together is really difficult for me, and I believe this is the right thing to do. What I don't think is the right thing to do is to not have church. If you are at home, do church. If you want to invite somebody over that you feel like is healthy, do church with them. We will provide something in terms of the sermon. I don't know what else. If we'll do music ministry, I don't know. We'll let you know. But this is not a sick day or a day off or a summer vacation or anything like that. And I, as much as I can urge you, stay focused during this time, not just for yourself, for others. This is very challenging. And we need to keep our focus on honoring Christ. And a central piece of that is church. So let me just encourage you, don't think, we'll just get back when we can. It just does not work that way. I got a text this morning at 7. Harry was going to lead worship for us, and he sent a text and woke up with a fever and chills, so we thought probably best if he didn't come. And so Judy and Don and Anthony stepped in on an hour's notice. So thank you very much. We're grateful for that. Anthony's over there. Harry, if you're watching, we're praying for you. We did pray for you. If you're not watching, we'll pray for you in other ways. But please keep him in prayer. He was out. He goes to a lot of public events in his work, and he didn't feel very well this morning. So keep him in your prayers. The title of the sermon here is Fear, Faith, and Hubris in Uncertain Times. If you don't know what hubris is, we'll get to that later. I thought a lot and asked the Lord a lot about, okay, well, what do you talk about on a Sunday like this? And it seemed like if we don't address where we're at, then it's sort of non-applicable. And so if you're tired of hearing about the virus and its impact and the things that have happened because of it, then listen on after the first few slides. We'll get back to theology. But I want to run us through. If someday, somewhere along the line, somebody just puts these 3 pictures in front of you, I guarantee you, you're going to think, oh yeah, remember that virus time? I was looking for this one photo of Purell just to put on the slide, and it came up on my screen, and I had to click on it so that it would I could make it a screenshot. And it was, this bottle was on sale for $372, and I thought, wow. If you've got any, this is a good time to raise money. The water, I was at Costco maybe less than a week ago, and I got there fairly early, and what I noticed going in is almost as though there was a train of carts hauling water the other direction. People were 2, 3, 4 cases of water at a time. Costco has since sort of restricted how much you can buy, but people are stocking up on water. I'm not sure that the water supply is in jeopardy of the virus, but it seemed to be a hot item. Toilet paper, the same. And anybody here get to a store and have no toilet paper there? It's going quickly, and so we're hoping that doesn't become the major crisis, is the toilet paper shortage in your household. The headlines have been disturbing. If you follow the headlines at all, not too long ago, panicked shoppers, empty shelves as coronavirus anxiety rises That was the easy part. Later, brawls and screaming matches break out at stores across the country as coronavirus panic buying intensifies. I saw an interesting altercation over at Safeway when I was there a couple of days ago, of people just not being kind and thinking that their needs were more than others. That we moved not too long ago, Trump declared the coronavirus outbreak a national emergency, which is a big deal. We don't have national emergency. We have localized for a tornado or a hurricane, but a national emergency is a big deal. If you're at all paying attention to the stock market's worst drop since 1987 took place. If you're a 401k watcher, I would suggest stopping for a little while. Things will hopefully settle out. But then the quarantines started happening, and I left a blank place there. I don't know if you recall when China did their quarantine, and everyone around the world thought, oh, good. It's a good thing that they're doing that finally. Felt like maybe that came in a little too late. But that was sort of reassuring. And Italy did their quarantine and maybe helped us feel a little bit safer. And then Spain did their quarantine, and if you're at all like me, maybe you started to feel like, man, how many quarantines are there going to be? France jumped in on the game, and then it starts to feel a little bit like everywhere is unsure. Then the United States quarantined Europe and said, you guys can't come here anymore. And so it's, and each time these are supposed to make us feel more secure, and I'm certain that they're good decisions, but there's another side where it just creates more uncertainty and more, this is a weird time, and it raises anxiety levels. And we do all those quarantines, and then still the virus is spreading, and we don't really know what's going to happen. Right now we can go out and about as reasonably free, but that could change. The Center for Disease Control Director said it's not out of the question to do a statewide or nationwide in-house quarantine for a period of time. And that, again, is somewhat unnerving. It causes some questions. How does this all work out? And the complexities of church are enough for me. I can't imagine trying to manage the complexities of the nation or a state or a county. We certainly need to be praying for our leaders because they have much larger scale issues to deal with, and they are almost constantly under criticism. And so as we're praying through the next weeks, please be praying for them. But I think the largest issue that's taking place is fear about everything. Our health, our family, our friends, the elderly folks that we know, the sick folks that we know. My oldest brother, he's over 60, so he's in the one category of bad. He's been through 2 sets of chemotherapy, so he's in another set that's bad. He's currently traveling and stranded in Amsterdam, so he's in all kinds of things. And I would be dishonest if I said I don't have a certain level of anxiety and concern for him and for some of you. When I pray through our directory and see people that are over 60, and that's the line for at risk. I don't know if you've looked around. We have a few, a lot. And then if you just go other issues involved, we have a lot of people that are seriously in jeopardy, and it causes me some fear. I don't have vast amounts of wealth, but I can honestly say that I was troubled last week as I saw the less than vast amounts become lesser. Financial markets, which we have all kinds of protections and stops in, they're beyond human management. And so I think, wow, what happens if that keeps going on? And so more issues to have fear about. And the question comes, well, how does a Christian pastor have fear? I don't know. I'm just a human, as you are too. And I would say I'd be surprised if any of us haven't had some levels of anxiety about certain things. If not, we'll get to that. This verse that we read, thanks, Marcy, the calming of the storm, we're familiar with it. We're going to read it anyhow because there's a couple of pieces I want to point out. It says, then, or that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, that's Jesus, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along. That's the disciples took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that they were nearly swamped. And we've heard this story lots of times where Jesus is in the boat and he's teaching and he says, let's go to the other side, and it's evening and the waves come up and it causes some problems. The verse continues on in 38, says, Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up. So the disciples are there, the waves are coming over the boat, and he's distressed, or they're distressed. Jesus is sleeping, and which would cause more distress, wouldn't it? It would for me. I've traveled some, and I've traveled with Jerry some, and sometimes things get kind of chaotic, and if I look back and Jerry's got his feet up snoozing when things are out of control, I'm going to think, that's not very good leadership. So I'm sure there's various levels of stress going on with the disciples that include death, but also cold and wet and unsure of planning and all kinds of things. And so they wake Jesus up. And in verse 39 it says, he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And that word right there that we see, afraid. Why are you afraid? The fear question in the Bible comes along is what is fear? Is it supposed to be there? Are we supposed to have it? Is it sin in and of itself? But it's fear. Right there in this verse, it says it. We see it. It says afraid. But don't miss what it actually says. It actually says, why are you so afraid? Now, you might think that's a subtlety, but that subtlety, if you have a New American Standard Bible, instead of so afraid, it actually says, why are you cowardly? And the distinction that Jesus is making here, whether it's so afraid or why are you cowardly, he's not saying you shouldn't necessarily have any fear in this circumstance. He's saying, he's addressing how they are responding to that fear. Why are you so afraid? Why are you cowardly right now? He is not saying, why are you just afraid? If the so wasn't there, if it wasn't cowardly, we would have a problem because it would be Jesus saying, fear is pointless. You shouldn't have had it. Now, could we argue fear is pointless? I'm not even going to argue that. In a little bit, I'm going to say that fear has a function. We've got to figure out what that function is. So, the other piece that I left out the first time intentionally in verse 38 says, Jesus was in the stern sleeping and the disciples woke him. I skipped the rest of it and went to he got up. But look what they said. They woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? And this is why Jesus said, why are you so afraid? Because their fear had affected their thinking. Their fear had impacted what they had already learned and had caused them to begin to think and believe things that they knew were not true. Don't you care if we drown? Fear causes us to think things that defy what we already know to be true. And we have to keep that in mind. So the question is, fear sin? And I have heard that it is. I don't believe so. I believe we've been wired to fear. And this is on tape, and I might get some pressure from some folks, but I think we're actually wired with fear. In a broken world with broken consequences of sin, fear is actually a necessary component when you are engaged in something and there's a threat to your life. Fear is what tells you you are in danger. How we respond to fear is something else. When I walk up to the edge of a cliff, now you may not have any fear of heights, I do. When you walk up to an edge of the cliff and your brain says, that's a long ways down and it'll be a really fast stop at the end, I'm going to step back. I'm afraid. I have a level of anxiety. If a poisonous snake comes out and there's something that rises up in me, it tells me that is a danger to me. That's all fear is a danger warning. Is fear sin? No. Is fear sin? Now, there's two kinds of fear that we have to address here. One's the instant. You're driving along and a car runs the light and it looks like it's going to hit you and that runs right up in your body. I could die right here. There's that instant warning system that tells us this. Now, there's another kind. Mark, you don't turn to Mark. I've got it here on the screen. If you're listening along, just listen closely. This is Jesus. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." Jesus is just about to go to the cross. He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." This is Jesus. If we move to Luke, it says, in being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. Now, I don't want to get into an argument about whether did Jesus fear. I'm just going to say he did. But he didn't sin. Jesus was about to bear the consequences of all sin. And he had a visceral response to that. He had an intellectual response to that. He had a spiritual response to that. He was distressed. We can put in whatever word we want, but this is the feeling that I have when I think about if we continued and did something wrong and somebody that we care about got sick and died because I did something wrong. I have that feeling of dread, of this can't happen. Fear. Fear is a warning to evaluate. God says this 100 times or more in the Old Testament. One of these two, fear not or do not be afraid. God says it over and over and over again, do not be afraid. But it isn't a commandment. Do not be afraid is an exhortation. It's an encouragement. It's an invitation to fix our eyes on what we can't see rather than the chaos we can see. I'm going to read that again. Do not be afraid is an exhortation. It's a statement to speak into when someone is afraid. It's an interjection of saying, you have fear, let me come in here and not say the fear was wrong, but what are we going to do with it? Don't be afraid. It's an encouragement, an invitation to fix our eyes on what we can't see, but what we know, versus what we can see, the chaos that's all around us. Our fear becomes sin when we follow it to go our way instead of God's way. When fear directs our path to ignore or disobey God is when fear becomes sin. Now look at what Jesus did when what I'm arguing was fear. Then Jesus said, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but your will be done. Jesus, when he was afraid of the consequences of what he was facing, Jesus went to the Father. And he put on the table his preferences and ended with, this is in your hands, not mine. Fear is a warning. It's a systemic command inside of you to address a situation. If we address that situation through the flesh, then it becomes sin. If we address that situation through the Father, it becomes faith. That's the difference. Now, there's this verse. I think it causes some confusion when we hear it wrong. Verse John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. Have you noticed ever in this verse, it doesn't say perfect faith drives out fear. It's been confusing to me at times because it would seem like that's what the logical statement would be. If you had perfect faith, you wouldn't have fear. But the goal here isn't to not have fear. It's to drive it out in an appropriate way. This verse specifically is actually talking about fear of judgment in end times. It's not talking about fear of spiders. It's not talking about fear of falling or heights or plane crashes or anything. It does at some point apply to those, but that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about fear of when I die, I'm going to get roasted by God. That's the fear it's talking about. And if your love for God and knowing His love is perfect, it will drive out that fear. But we can take this and allow it to help us as we look more closely at it, because it's perfect love that drives out fear. My love for the Father causes me to know who He is. Through my relationship with Him, more and more I know who He is, and that love relationship that I have with Him allows that knowledge of God to push out, to drive out my fears. It doesn't prevent them. It drives them out. It doesn't cause me to go, oh, you know what? My wife was just at work and 2 people were diagnosed with the virus, and I just go, hey, that's all good. It causes me to go, wow, she was around. Now, she's not over 60 yet, but she's close to that risk line. Well, she does get cheaper meals at Denny's, but she is around people, has been around people that have been around people with this virus. That causes me a concern, not because I might get it. I don't want to lose my wife. Perfect love drives out fear. I don't immediately go, no, faith. I go, God loves my wife. Hey, God loves me. We're in His hands. It could be in His plan that the virus takes out my wife. At that point, I will end up going back through the entire system again. But for now, I can go, He loves my wife. He loves me. We're in His hands. And that drives out my fear. My vanishing retirement fund. Lord, what's going on? He loves me. He's promised to take care of me. It's not my perfect faith that's going to keep me from having anxiety. It's my perfect trust in the perfect God that loves me perfectly. That fear will dissipate instead of dominate. That's what happens. And that's why I'm going to argue, and we can have this conversation later if we want to, that fear is in us to drive us to Him if we pursue it. If we don't, then we'll pursue our fears and be driven by them and owned by them. We don't want that to happen. What we want to have happen is we see something that causes this internal response, and it rises up and we go, God, I know loves me. How do I get back away from this fear to my faith? Now, hubris. Hubris is disregarding pride, disregarding confidence. It's not just confidence, it's disregarding. It means it's just brushing aside. It's an absolute lack of concern, choosing to be so disconnected and isolated and just going, yeah, that crazy world out there, it's all good. God's got it in control. Pusha. I don't know how to spell that, so I didn't put it on here. There's all kinds of problems with that. One of the very first ones in my thinking is a lack of understanding of humanity. If you feel like, whatever happens, that's okay. But people are dying. People are losing their retirements who have already retired. People are ill. They're stranded. They're afraid. And for the believer to take a stance of, it's all good, at the very least, lacks empathy, which God demands that we have, a heart that understands others. This is what the verse after Terry read today. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. So are my thoughts than your thoughts. If my thinking is, hey, I know what's going on. I've got this covered. We're all good. That's saying I know exactly what God's doing. It isn't saying I just trust God. Because I can just give you from my own life example this week. Well, maybe the last 2 weeks. Absolutely laborious trying to figure out, Lord, what do you want us to do? If it was just me, and there was a car barreling down on you, I believe that I would rush into the street to take you out of its way without any question or thought. So I believe in church. We should have church. It should be here for people. But then, what about somebody who then sees me just going, absolutely, you should be in church. And so they come to church and they get exposed and they get sick and they die. What do we do with that? I don't know. Other than seek God. And that's what we've done the last couple of weeks. And I didn't honestly come here this morning to cancel the next 2 weeks. It was a belief amongst our leadership that this is what God was saying for the next 2 weeks. It goes actually contrary to my belief of church. But you know what trumps my belief of church is my belief that God leads the leaders. And so here we are. But if all I did was say, God's got us covered, it's going to be fine. I do believe God's got us covered, and it's going to be fine if we seek Him with all of our hearts and with the desire to know and hear and follow. I have seen people, well-meaning believers, saying this is a work of the devil, and we need to put our foot down and stop it. We need to take authority, or whatever words you want to use. And I'll be as honest as I can be. I don't believe that. I actually don't believe this virus at this time in this place is a work of the devil. And if you want to read, if that's possible, just read Revelations chapter 6. There are times when God releases things upon the earth for His purposes. And there's nothing that comes across the earth that He doesn't use for His purposes. Nothing. And so if I walk my way back and I go, well, my heart beats every time by the grace of God. If He withdrew His grace, I would cease to breathe. My heart would stop. I would be dead. And I believe that about the squirrel that runs by. And I believe that about the bird that flies over. I believe that about all life. And I believe that about viruses too. If God said that virus is done, it's done. He could have stopped it yesterday, last week, last month, tomorrow. But He hasn't, because I believe He has something He wants to do. And if I take the approach of just Christian hubris, this is absolutely, it's bad, it has to be bad. God doesn't want anything bad for His people. It must be bad, so I'm just going to rebuke it in the name of Jesus. You might be rebuking the work of God. Are you? I can't answer that. But please don't take the stance of, I know what's going on, because I've got my faith, and this is what I think is true, and I'm staying with that. Now, stand on Jesus. Stand on God's goodness. Stand on His love, but don't stand on that you know what He's doing. Because you don't. And I don't either. I heard somebody say, about maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days ago, and they'd said X number, I can't remember what the number is, how many people have died from the virus. And they said, the virus has killed, let's say, 80 people so far. I disagree. This virus isn't going to kill anybody. Any more than cancer does, any more than heart attacks do. God designed our days from the beginning of time. From day 0, God wrote in the book of life how many days each of us are going to live. Now, will the virus be the mechanism to end some people's lives? Absolutely. If we mismanage things, do we end up with a different outcome? I believe we are responsible. We have to do everything we can to be as responsible as we can, because people's lives are at stake. But God's the one who decides who lives and who dies. No virus, no doctor, no scientist, no politician, God. Now, well, what does that mean? Do we, again, just disregard the virus? Absolutely not. What I'm asking us to do here is go, I don't know. And ask God, how should I pray? What should I seek? If I'm praying against God, I'm wasting my time. How do I pray for God? We look here, this event in the boat. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. They said to Him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? And they say, why are you so afraid? Or Jesus says, why are you so afraid? He says it after He calms the storm. And you see that word there, rebuked? He got up and rebuked the wind. That word means to put in its place, which is below Jesus. The waves, the storms, nature, below Jesus. So He could stand up in the boat and say, stop. And they have to. And that leads to this last line that I did not include. They became very much afraid, not of the waves, but of who they were with. They became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" See, the problem they had, even though they'd been with Jesus a little while, is they didn't know who they were with. They didn't understand who they were with. Their fear, absolutely justified in terms of waves and chaos. Their problem was not even who they went to, but how they went to him. They went to him, right decision. They accused him of not caring, wrong. And you're going to see that in this event. People saying, how can a good God allow this to happen? It's a misunderstanding of the entire created order at this point. We have to understand who God is. We have to understand who we are. We are going to have fear. Please allow that fear to drive you to God, not to your own devices. Your own devices lead to only one thing: more fear. If you're driven to God, what you will find is that fear becomes smaller. It shouldn't disappear because we're still in dangerous times, but it will continually push you back to the hands of the one who loves you and the only one who can manage this crisis. Amen? Amen.